Hey, what's going on, everyone? We got a really great show for you today. It's one of my most highly anticipated guests and topics personally, because we are going over the world's fairs and the mysteries that surround them. I just want to let you know, and I wanted to give a quick update here because we're going over a lot of imagery and pictures. So if you usually listen on audio, you might want to tune in on either YouTube or Odyssey, because some of those pictures are really, really cool to dissect, and we go over all the details in them in the show. So without any further ado, we have Howdie Mickoski talking about the world's fairs. All right, everybody, welcome back to Dig Within. I am Rob Edward, as always, and today I have author of The Power of Then, Revealing Egypt's Lost Wisdom, Falling for Truth, A Spiritual Death and Awakening, Exposing the Expositions, Ancient Rome in America, all of which are meant to get the reader to all of which are meant to get the reader to question your thoughts, beliefs, reality, and the history of the world. His writing is not meant to have one agree with his words, but to have one think for oneself. Welcome to the show, Howdie Mickoski. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, like I said, I'm about 7 out of 10. I think I've had 3 days of snow blizzard and it's finally stopped. So I'm hopeful in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'll see spring. We'll
Right.
see.
Yeah, well, yeah, we have quite long winters here in Canada too, so I definitely feel the
Yeah.
pain, but I would imagine Norway is a bit different than northern Canada.
It's almost very much the same. It's just I happen to live a little bit higher in the mountains now. So if I was more down at coastal level, snow's gone already there. So it's just because I've moved a little bit more outskirts, a little bit more into the nowhere land. That also means your seasons get pushed back. So trade-off for having a little bit of being away from society.
Right, and I'm really glad we were able to connect because you were just moving house, I believe, when we first sort of connected, and with Wi-Fi issues and all that kind of stuff. But I'm really this is one of my most personally highly anticipated, and I've just been most excited to connect with you and bring your work to my audience, because the idea of the world's fairs and just the very strangeness of them has been new to me, and it's fascinating how we didn't know these things beforehand, and the common narrative behind them is just so strange. And I just love how you've dove into this, and you've really succinctly sort of broken down how these kind of don't really align with the narrative that we're kind of being told. And I'm just really excited to go over some of these things. So I was wondering if you could maybe discuss
Sure.
how did you get into this? Why did it start to pique your interest? And then maybe like, why should anyone truly care about these things?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I have my degree in history. I went to Wilfrid Laurier, not far from where you live now, and um, thought I had a pretty good knowledge of history. So I had an interest in history, but as an example, the World's Fairs, which should have been part of of my curriculum, particularly, I took some 19th century US history courses. So specific to the time of the fairs I'm writing in the book, never mentioned in any of my history courses. So that what later on it blew my mind. So I'd finished the first couple of books you had mentioned, and it was early 2019 before all the craziness. And I was in Florence and I was studying cathedrals. I was looking into how the cathedrals were built as machines. So what the energy was doing, how the energy was being brought into the cathedral, and what it was doing. So I was there studying that. Just as I came back, for some reason, I bumped into a video from one of the earlier researchers on this topic, maybe a John Levy, maybe I'm not sure who it was, on the Chicago Exposition, and it was strange. Like it was really, really strange to see the quality of the buildings, the quality of the architecture, the supposed story of the fairs, and combining it with what I had just been researching in Florence with the cathedrals. I was seeing similar structures, similar building style, similar everything. So I thought, okay, I'll take a look into this a little bit. And once I began to dig into the fact that there were hundreds of these World's Fairs, particularly being built between 1850 and 1915, 1920, at the end of the First World War, all over the world, with giant sites. We're talking 500, 700, 1,200 acres. I mean, 2.3 square kilometers of site built supposedly in record times of 2 years or less, with no modern building machines, no modern building equipment. And then generally, as soon as they were finished, these expositions were dynamited, blown up, and destroyed. And I think that was the part that got me to really want to study the fairs, was not just how did they build them, how did they build these things that they're just beautiful. I mean, the quality of the workmanship is staggering. And then why would you blow it up right after? That got me going, as I guess, at a start. And then once I began digging into more detail of what was going on in the fairs, what was happening, what was being presented, what the story or the narrative was being presented at the fairs, what was the story, the historical narrative of the cities. I never looked into the history of Chicago or the history of St. Louis in detail, the history of Buffalo, and the stories of the cities are as crazy as the World Fairs. And for me, it was the fact they were blowing them up, the fact they were building supposedly 1,200 acres of spectacular buildings and then blowing them up with dynamite. That in itself is an indication of you got something, you got some kind of cover up going on. What is it? And I spent 8 months digging into it to write the book.
So, and are these still occurring today? And how is it different from why are the ones that are from the like you said, the 1850s to the early 1900s, why are they different and why are they so interesting as opposed to the ones that are happening today? Or are they still,
Yeah, so the World Fair,
interesting today?
Well, yeah, in a sense, not this. Yeah, they changed after the First World War, so they had been going on since the first one. The first official one was 1851 in London at the Crystal Palace. Again, an impossible building and an impossible story. But they've gone on. Canada had a couple. There's one in Montreal in 1967, one in Vancouver in, what was that, 1998 or something like that, or 1988, I think it was in Vancouver. Anyway, so they go on. The new one was in Dubai. So it just finished, like it finished last month. It was supposed to be 2020, which they pushed back because of the world situation, but they didn't change the name. It was still World Expo 2020, even though it was taking place in 2021, 22. And so why are the fairs important? So I'm going to quickly explain why we should actually care about the world's fairs. So the world fairs of the time I wrote the book in, 1851 till the San Francisco Fair, 1915, these fairs were what you might call technological fairs. That's what they were kind of called. They were there to espouse that technology and was the way to give answers to everything, as well as presenting the historical narrative that seems like it was being manufactured. It's important that along with Roman and Greek style architecture. So all the buildings supposedly built, we'll get into all this if you want, could these things have been built or not, all resembled ancient Rome or ancient Greece. And so that period was about 60 or 70 years. And to me, I think that's important, and unbelievably even more important now is because I think it's the end of whatever the last reset was. That's a word I used in my book in 2019 before any of this current stuff started. And it kind of blew my mind when that word started to be blown at us from every news source in the world, that this had been a word that had been uttered through alternate history for a long time. This word reset, this idea that something happens, humans seem to get to a certain technological point and some ruling group or organization or entities or whatever don't like it and push a reset button. We see a giant collapse of this human, really good technology, and it starts fresh. And I think the world fairs of that time, one of my theses was that the fairs of the late 1800s were the coming out of the last reset and was creating the narrative of the world that we've known since then. So the world that we think of and the way everything runs, from government to education to food to, I mean, literally everything has its origin, if you look for it, at these early fairs. Since the First World War, the fairs have continued, but they've changed. All of a sudden, the Greek and Roman architecture is gone, and now it started to have a more futuristic kind of feel to it, and began to start seeing that science in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s was going to answer all of our questions. Then it was the answers were in outer space. Then the answers were in computing and artificial intelligence. The one in Dubai just ended with a fair espousing smart cities, and it ended with the World Government Summit discussing how we must have a one world government and a new economic system, basically a blockchain system of digital currency. So to me, the fairs have always been presenting where the world is heading. It's like it's almost it's not as much needed now from the standpoint of, you might say, propaganda, because television and movies and everything else, the internet is all there. But if you wanted to get the population thinking a certain way in 1880, what a fantastic way to do it is have these fairs all over the world, have them mimicked, have the same story, the same information, the same narrative presentation. And I think that's why they're so important, because it's telling us where we were. It's giving us indication of where we are. And if we can dig through the World's Fairs, we might get an idea of at least what's attempted to be in store for us five years or 10 years down the road.
Right. And that's what I find fascinating about them too, because just hearing you speak about them like that, it's like back in the day that they were paying homage to essentially history, or that's what they're telling us, right? That's why it was Greco-Roman style of architecture. And now it's just this new technology where we can go in the future. And for me, I find it most damning. I don't know about you, but when they're in Europe, I think you can explain the mystery. You can kind of explain away a bit more because there is more history there. They do those buildings in those kind of styles, and they already have those kind of buildings there. But when I saw what your work was showing was in Chicago and Buffalo and all these different places, you can't the timeline that we have for coming to America and the history of America, seeing those buildings there just makes you think that something's not adding up here, because we don't have those styles of buildings here. Do you know what I mean? And also the way the
Well,
technology of
you
building.
do, and that's part of the challenge. It's part of the challenge. And so if you pull up a couple of photographs, just so that the people can see what we're talking about, who don't have any, who, if someone hasn't bumped into this recently.
Sure.
Yeah, so just pull up, it doesn't matter what city you want to go to.
Okay, let's do.
If you take Buffalo as an example, let's just pull up a screenshot of the Buffalo World's Fair. Um, Not bad. What's the next one you've got? This is the one to, um, so these are good. Anyway, just some ideas of what these things are looking like in Buffalo. Um, yeah, so that's why when I focused on the book, I focused only on the United States. Now, the world fairs were happening all over the world. There were fairs in Milan, in Belgium, in the Philippines, in Buenos Aires, and wherever. But like you say, if there were old style buildings, like maybe pull up, you had the one of Chicago earlier. Go back into Chicago. We'll show that one. It was the second screenshot in of Chicago. I think it was number one, number two. I think it was that one. Yeah, there you go. So it's a perfect example of what we're talking about. It's a cover of my book. So when you're dealing with, if you saw this in downtown Budapest or downtown Paris or Berlin, there would be an explanation. It's, well, these buildings were built in the 1200s, or they had been built in the 1200s and the war, and they rebuilt them. This is the style. This is Chicago, 1893. Why do you need to be building in obvious? This is right out of downtown Rome. This is the main statue here. The statue of Columbia has a toga on. If we go to the next, what's the next screenshot you have, for example, just in your list there. So when you're looking at this kind of architecture, first of all, why is this what they want to build? Why do they want to build with this style in the 1890s? And all of them, every World's Fair built with this kind of style. And again, the scale the scale in Chicago, for example, there's 700 acres of this. One building, the manufacturer's building, was the largest building on earth, and it could hold 300,000 people. 300,000 people could fit in the manufacturer's building. That's one building on a site of 700 acres. How is that even possible? Like, how is that possible that you can have that kind of building quality? Like, yeah, one more. What's the next one you got? let's see what the next, yeah, that's a really good example. This is looking down from the core of the world back towards the main statue. And just this in itself, I mean, think of what it would take to build this today with this kind of finish. Now, we might as well tell the historical narrative, the way they try to explain this building is that it is claimed it is built out of a material called staff, which is a type of plaster laid over top of a wooden interior. So similar to what the facade of a movie set would be built of, right? You don't, a movie set doesn't build all the buildings, it builds like just fronts. But first of all, these are not fronts. These are complete buildings in which had exhibits, priceless works of art. Countries sent tens of thousands to millions of dollars worth of material. You can't allow one of these buildings to collapse. In many cases, you could take elevators and things to the top of the buildings and have views over top of the entire exposition. Take the one like that one in Buffalo that you saw. That one was that's a drawing, by the way, just so in case anyone's wondering. It's a drawing of a picture, but you could take an elevator to the top of the 325-foot high electrical tower. Like, are you going to have an electrical tower built out of staff, built out of plaster and wood, and have people on top of it taking elevators and collapsing? Just here's an example of people on top of one of the buildings looking across. I think that's the electrical building on the one side of it with the towers on it. Like, you're not going to build the building these people are standing on out of temporary materials, like they say. You can't afford to have the thing collapse and have 20,000 dead people. These are strongly built structures. And again, as I talked to a building contractor, because that's where the book began to take its shape, was once I talked to the building contractor and asked him how long it would take, could he build it today? Could he build the Chicago Exposition today? And he said yes, but it would take him 15 years. It's 2 years for the planning because it's such a massive thing. So they would actually need to plan it for 2 years. You do 2 years just for all the water work. You can see just in the photos you've had, these are all generated lakes and lagoons and rivers and et cetera. And this is on top of a swamp on top of it. So they've had to build on the swamp. They've had to grade it. They've had to turn into the pools. Then they've had to drive stakes, massive. All of these buildings are supposed to be supported by like 1,000 wooden poles driven into the swamp. And then building on top of it, he said would take another 10 to 12 years. So he said if he had a workforce of like 150,000 people and 15 years, he might get it built. So in 1890, how does this get done in 2 years? His answer was, it's not possible. It's like the pyramids of Egypt. It's just the story does not match the presentation. And then, like we say, it's not just Chicago. It's Chicago, Buffalo, St. Louis, New York, Nashville, Omaha, Seattle, Portland, and then all through the world. They're doing this and then destroying it. It makes no sense.
Right. And I believe that they said that they had 44,000 workers for Chicago. But even just thinking about the logistic, and this is what I love about your work too, is like just working, okay, this is the narrative, and then working logically back from that and going, where are all these people coming from? And how are they, where are they living while they're working here? How are they getting, like, I was saying to someone just before when I told them I was going to have you, and trying to poke holes in some of these things. And it's like, these people can't just go home they can't grab a pizza or something like that on the way home after work to fuel up for the next day. Like, how are they getting fed? What are they getting? Like, who's cooking for them? I think I did the math on something. The average hotel right now in America is 313 rooms. You put two people in there with the 44,000, it's equals something like you would need 70 full hotels for them to be in, right? And not to mention it's 2 years time frame in Chicago. They have winters just as intense as in Canada too. And it's sort of like, how would they survive building these when they only have, I mean, you must lose at least what, 4 months out of the year due to weather conditions?
Yeah, they were very clear on that they didn't build during the winter as well. That's why they pushed, the fair was supposed to be 1892, but they pushed it back to 93 because they lost so much time during the winter. That's one of their explanations. Yeah, it's all that kind of stuff. It's not only that, how do they get fed? Where does the food come from? Who's cooking it? Where are all the bathrooms? I think the number I had was 100,000 working on the Chicago Fair. 100,000 workers, how many bathrooms do you need? And then you get the problem of you look at the construction photos. So the construction photos, and again, this was something my building contractor was very concerned about, was that while you do get a few images, particularly of St. Louis, St. Louis has the most construction photos along with San Francisco. But the problem with the construction photos is that generally they are, this is that's Louisville, actually. That's the big fair they had in Louisville in 1893, tore that building down to build a movie theater. Is you'll get pictures of wood and plaster structures. And I don't doubt that buildings were built for the fairs. Because the thesis, sorry, I'm running all over the place. I'm kind of trying to answer your question and say things at the same time. I don't doubt that things were built for the fair. They had to be. The Midway itself, when you look at pictures of the Midways, as sort of the carnival area, you might say, those are definitely simplistically built areas. And a lot of the other areas you can see are built, and you'll have construction photos like that. The problem would be if you get a construction photo like this, the front of the Cascades at St. Louis, you will never see construction photos. You will see a completed building with scaffolding on the side of it and maybe a little bit of work on the roof. It makes complete sense if these were found buildings, as an example, if these buildings were already there and all you needed to do was clean them up and repaint them, then all you would need is scaffolding and a whole lot of people would paint. And they developed for these fairs a new technique known as whitewashing. And we know that what that word means in English. But in this case, it meant a power paint driver, which would drive white paint onto all the buildings at high speed, at high pressure, that was developed for Chicago. And so that's the first problem you got. The second problem when he looked at the photos is that not only is there no construction work being done on the big buildings, when you look at the ground around the large buildings, particularly of St. Louis, he said he looked at it and it was just mud. And he said to me, well, where's the discarded coffee cup? Where's the sandwich wrapper? Where's the chair where somebody's sitting down? Where's the bathrooms of these guys? If you've got 50,000 workers going on constantly daily working, you can't possibly have a work site that is this clean, that has, I mean, you can't even clean this up for a photograph. There's no way you could do it. His response was, no one's been at this site for like a year. This is like this is an empty work site. This is not a work site at all. He's also looking, where's the building materials? If you're building stuff, even if you're building the scaffolding, you've got to have massive amounts of wood just sitting next to where you're putting up the scaffolding. He looked at the construction photos and said, nothing is going on here. So you have these issues as well of trying to explain buildings like this with no real proper construction photo. In fact, in times almost early photoshopped construction photos. You have things like this. This is the Pike in St. Louis, and we can talk about what's on these midways because this is where the historical narrative is being generated, is on these. But you can see this does not look the same as what you just looked at. This looks more like it's been built by Hollywood set building makers. So I don't doubt that lots of things were in fact built for these fairs. I don't doubt there were workmen. I don't doubt that there were 20, 30, 40,000. But if the majority of the if the big buildings were already there, which is what my main thesis is, you've got that I now got a third option, but was one, they had a technology they're not supposed to have, and they really did build it all in 2 years. But it has to be them. They have to have an unknown technology, almost like 3D printing or something, like to make something like this. Two, the main buildings were already there, part of an ancient civilization that was worldwide, that these fairs were used to dig out, uncover, make look fresh, have the fair, and then destroy them after that. The third option I've come up with recently is that the buildings, what was the third one I had? Oh, I can't even remember what it is now. I actually had a third theory. I'll let you get a comment in while I'm thinking of that. Go ahead.
Right. Well, one of the things that I found fascinating too was, okay, you have, I mean, where's the funds coming from? So you have there's just straight up materials and all these different things. But I mean, I read one somewhere that it was 44,000. But even if it's like you said, 100,000, you're paying them $1 a day or 50 cents a day, and you're doing that for 2 years. Those amount of people, like, you are getting into astronomical numbers for the time period. And then we haven't even really talked about building practices. Like, there are no powered tools. And how are they getting to the works where are they living, but how are they getting there? And then even the people who are frequenting these things, This is horse and buggy, is it not? Like there's no cars at this time. How are you getting these materials to the site?
Right. Exactly. These are important questions. One is the money. The money is being financed by what were known as the big barons of the day, the railroad and steel barons. They are the ones who were supposedly pumping in all the money for these things. But important when it comes to the money stuff, all of these fairs lose money, like a lot of it. The Chicago or the Philadelphia Exposition of 1876 lost $4 million in 1876. I can't even imagine what kind that would be like, 400 million realistically today. It's lost. And yet everyone thought this is a good idea. We need to do this again and again and again. And one of the things about rich people, one of the reasons they're rich and stay rich is they don't lose money. And as soon as they get into a venture that loses money, they stop. Except here in the World's Fair ventures, they kept doing them again and again and again, which is saying they don't care if they lose money. Something else is going on. And when you start talking about the one of the strangest things about, again, yeah, no power tools, no cars, no machinery other than you'll see some steam machinery once in a while at the later fairs. One of the weirdest things, if you look carefully, they don't build roads. They don't build roads to bring the materials to the site. And you see this, we were talking about that this style of building. This style of building exists all over North America. And like if you go to if you see old pictures of in Canada, Toronto, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Montreal, you go look at photos from the 1920s, 1910s, you're going to see spectacular Greco-Roman architecture that slowly disappeared. There's not many things that still exist, like the Parliament Hill in Canada and Ottawa, and a few buildings in Toronto. But in the United States, if you live in the US, you've still got all your state capitol buildings. And every state capitol building might as well be almost like a replica of the Parthenon in Greece. It's giant, it's massive, it's domed, it's columned. And then when you go look at the original construction photos of them from like usually the 1920s or 1930s, it'll just be in the middle of a mud field. So they've been dragging in supposedly marble and heavy stone and granite, but they didn't take a week to just lay a road down first to make the transport of the material that much. Obviously, that's step one. So so many of the pictures are smoking guns because you would not begin a project like that bringing in that many materials without a road. And you'll find that at some of the world's fairs too. The construction photos have no roads built. So again, it's telling you right away, look carefully, the narrative is lying to you. And I'm not saying I have the answer. That's the other really key part of this. I'm not saying I know the answer to the question. I don't. All I've been able to do in the span of the 8 months I wrote the book and the 2 years kind of since is realize the narrative we're presented is obviously a lie. I've now seen that the whole narrative of the 1800s, and in fact, probably everything in history is a lie. But that doesn't mean I have an answer, only that you can break the narrative down and at least stop believing the narrative and at least maybe have the possibility of getting pieces of information that may actually be true.
Right. And I think we were talking briefly before we started here that once you start to poke holes in these things, if you're someone who just believes the narrative sort of outright, you have to find the logical answer to these questions. But if you're just trying to find the truth, you can leave a question unanswered. But the person who's, I guess, arguing that it's all legitimate, how do you answer some of those questions, right? And some of the pushback that I got was,
well, you have an example. You said you got some people, you asked some people to their opinions of the fairs, and you got responses, sort of what you might call standard responses. What are some of those? What are some of the things you got when you were bringing it up with? And we can try to go through some of them right here.
Okay, so a couple, like, it would be too expensive to do a whole city. Like, why don't they build these nowadays, right? So it'd be too expensive to do a whole city, like the fairground itself. So it's just in one localized spot, kind of like how countries host the Olympics and spend money on building that infrastructure. But the fair was to host engineering and innovation. So I guess the fact that it's a localized spot, they apparently had the means and the amount of workforce to build these things. And one of them was sort of saying similar things to like the CN Tower, right? Is an example of that's a localized spot. It's still used as a technological engineering innovation today. But even that, I was just thinking, well, yeah, but I just looked quickly at the history of that, and it cost X amount of dollars with these amount of people, and it took 3 years to build one building.
Okay, that's one. I'll get back. Let's just hear a few of them first. Olympics is a good question. Yeah, next. What else
So
you got?
just that there was a lot of people working on them. They hired a lot of people. There was campsites as opposed to, I don't know, hotels or wherever you were to
Mhm.
host these people.
Okay. Yep.
They
Next
did
one.
have the so they did have the technology to build this at the time period. It's not like they did it by hand. I guess, Portland cement did exist at that time. There are manual powered cranes and pulley systems, I guess, that you could hoist those things. But again, you don't have powered engines. You don't have gasoline. I think the diesel engine was invented around the late 1800s, maybe turn of the century.
Yep. Okay.
Why don't we build buildings like this anymore? Mostly cost. The city centers are always nice, and then outside the city center, most homes are less detailed and less intricate and all that kind of stuff. And then that goes into the CN Tower stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently, they did have vehicle. Someone was arguing that they did have vehicles at the time and cranes, and they did have. I mean, there were roadways and highways and stuff like that, and train systems that went from Chicago and stuff like that. But again, for me at least, you kind of have to wonder, they're not train systems as we know it today, where there's 20 trains per track running 24 hours a day. And just to get the materials there, if they're using that train, it would be nonstop for 2 years, never never breaking down and all that kind of stuff. And then the material, the narrative is that they use, sort of like you were saying, the whitewashing of the buildings, the wood facade, and then plastering the outside potentially. And then even for me, using concrete though, doing concrete work myself, even to build the forms for these would take forever. And then just some of the little details in the column work, you can't build a form to have concrete stay like that. You know what I mean? Like, you'd have to sort of sculpt it or do something. You can't pour that into a form, peel the form off, and it'd be so detailed in those kind of ways. Those are the initial ones there. I don't know if that's enough for you to kind of
That's a good start. Okay, so and I mean I've heard and seen a ton of responses to my stuff. In some cases, some very antagonistic responses. There have been some people who've been in certain comment sections who've been very upset, actually, which tells me I'm hitting something, right? So the first one, that's a standard one. Well, it's kind of like we do with the Olympics. I mean, a city gets the Olympics and they spend a whole lot of money and they build a bunch of buildings and they build them rather quickly and they look really nice and they have the Olympics and okay. The difference is one, Olympics happen only, well, now there's two, right? Two Olympics every 4 years, all over the entire world. At this time, you were getting these kind of fairs happening on medium to large scales, 10 to 15 every year around the world. So you're having 10 or 15 of these, not necessarily built to the scale of Chicago and St. Louis, the full World's Fair, but you're getting what you might call medium fairs constantly. Like that picture you showed of earlier of the big building, that was Louisville. So Louisville, New Orleans, all these other places, they had fairs themselves and were building structures constantly. There was constant building everywhere. It's not like the Olympics. The Olympics then were built generally that some of the buildings are meant to actually, you don't have the Olympics and then just blow the buildings up. You would keep some of the building, you'd keep the in Montreal, you kept the Olympic Stadium, and that became the home of the Expos and the Alouettes, right? So the buildings were being built for the Olympics, but then a lot of them were reused. I know, like the ones in Calgary for the Winter Olympics, that became part of the entire Canadian winter training program for the next 20 years until the ones were built in Vancouver and kind of, you might say, replaced them for that Olympics. These World Fairs are built for a 6-month period, which loses a massive amount of money, and then they're all destroyed. Nothing is retained usually except one building, which is always claimed to be, this is the only permanent building. It had some special artwork in it, and that's why they had to make it fireproof. So they built one real building, and all the rest are just these fake buildings. But then we look into things like San Diego in 1915, which partnered its World Fair with San Francisco, and they seem to have built all permanent buildings. So that story falls apart when you start showing that the destruction of the whole fair is not like the Olympics, because if you're going to pump in all that money and all that focus, you need to get something long term out of it. And they got nothing out of these fairs other than the event itself. And as an example, here's the picture you have up here on the screen there's a lot of people there, not a tremendous amount, but millions of people are supposed to be coming to each of these fairs. The fair at Omaha, Nebraska, 1898, was supposed to have 1 million people visiting it. Omaha, Nebraska, 1898, like you said, there's only like will be 1 or 2 train lines from anywhere coming to Omaha. Where does, okay, let's say 200,000, let's say 100,000, because Omaha is a very small city. Let's say 100,000 of the visitors are local. That means you're talking 900,000. Let's say of the 900,000, you've got repeats. They come a couple times. That's still 300,000 or 400,000 people had to come from outside Omaha to Omaha, Nebraska. How did they get there? First of all, how many trains would you need to bring in 300,000 people in 4 or 5 months? And like I said, where did they stay? There's no record of mass building of hotels, and I guarantee these are all rich elite or at least higher classed people of the United States. They're not coming to sleep in some tent in the middle of nowhere. They need to have excellent accommodation that wouldn't exist originally in Omaha. So where did these things get built and where do they get rid of? So there's question one. Number two you get is about the people, the workforce, right? The two things usually come up. One, the building standards were different in the day. It didn't matter then if somebody fell off a roof and died and broke their neck. So they could push these people and they could work 14-hour days, and it didn't matter if they died. And the other was old world craftsmanship. Oh yes, the people of the time knew how to build things. They understood quality, so they could build quality. Okay, let's take that on face value. The thing is, if you're going to build quality, quality takes longer than putting up something, junk. Here's the Buffalo World's Fair, the whole Buffalo World's Fair. If I'm gonna have a craftsman build me a beautiful bookshelf, it's going to take an extra week or 2 weeks because they have to put time into it. So their old world craftsmanship means it should take longer to build, not shorter to build. If you're going to put this kind of work, I mean, just as an example, like look at the lagoons and the lakes. And if no one's done any building or talked to a building contractor, like ask them how long it would take to create just the waterways you're seeing here. And remember, there's no bulldozers, there's no giant machines. This is being done with guys with shovels. Guys with shovels are digging this stuff out, putting them in wheelbarrows, moving it off the site, and then bringing water in from, I don't know where you bring the water in, bringing water in. And so just never mind even the roadways and the buildings themselves. You've got that problem. Buffalo is also a problem we can see later for the weathering that's on all the buildings and the plant life that's growing on them for supposedly a new site. But that's the second one you have. Okay, 3, technology. So supposedly they do have police systems and whatever, but go to the center of the picture on your screen right now. That's the Buffalo Electric Tower. It's got it was 325 feet high. It had, I think, 50,000 light bulbs. There it is, 50,000 or maybe even more, thousand. There were more light bulbs in the Buffalo World's Fair than there were in all of New York City at the time. So what kind of technology have you got to be able, first, to put that up, and 2, to run it? Now, supposedly, you have this Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison battle that they bring out for all these fairs, and Nikola Tesla was winning all of the electricity contracts for the fairs. And in this one in Buffalo, the story goes that he hooked up a generator to Niagara Falls and moved electric power from Niagara Falls to Buffalo, but no real explanation of exactly how that was done. We've never seen real pictures of the generators working, of anything that was actually powering. I believe that whole story is fake. I believe that just like what I found with the cathedrals that started me off, the buildings themselves generate the energy. You talked about the CN Tower. The CN Tower in Toronto, just like the Eiffel Tower in Paris or anything else, it generates energy. It's actually, if you actually shut the power off in the city, technically something like the CN Tower should continue to be powered because it's been built as an energy receiver. All of the buildings you're seeing are energy receivers. And so the domes, the towers, the mercury balls, the copper roofs, these are all ancient design techniques to create free energy. And what we're seeing here is the last round of, you might say, free energy being presented to the world before it's being taken away. And this new thing called AC/DC type electricity that we pay for now coming into use. Electricity, at least in this time frame, as far as I understand it, was free. No one was in control of it. No one charged you for it. It was there. So you've got that. Now that means they did have access to a technology, because if they knew you have this kind of power grid and you knew you have access to power automatically, then they could have powered machines at the time, even though they weren't supposed to have them. They could have really been powering them, but we just have no photos and no proof of it.
And just to do one little
Yeah.
side note on that topic was, if they say that, okay, but then they could just build that technology into it, but there's no way you could do that in the time frame of the 2 years.
Again, that's the issue, right? It's the building process of, even today with modern machines. Go find a building contractor that can tell you. I mean, these are people who build giant projects all their life. This is what they do, right? Never mind, just it's even people who've worked on buildings, who've been on construction sites. They can just look at this stuff and say 2 years. No way. So the fact that this is supposedly done in that time frame in 2 years is telling you. I can't remember what Disneyland in like when was that built? 1950s or 1960s? And I think that took 3 years, 4 years to build Disneyland in California. So it's a perfect example, almost modern style equipment, and it took 3 to 4 intricate, more detailed, more requiring actual like structures and struts and whatever else. How does that happen? So the detailed we can kind of pass. We've already talked a bit about the roadways and the no train systems. And then again, we've already kind of covered the staff and the facade. I don't doubt that staff and facade and wood buildings were there, but does that really look like a plaster building with a wood structure? And would you trust putting works of art, $1 million works of art into a building like that? It's like, take a look at this. Look at the electricity generation required to put the Buffalo Tower into a searchlight like that and have everything else lit up. How much electricity does that require? And like, really, in 1901, you're figuring out how to get that from Niagara Falls? Like, come on. Like, it just, all the narrative just blows up when you start to honestly think about it. And you can say one's a coincidence, two is a coincidence, but once you start getting 5, 6, 7, 10 of these, not a coincidence.
Right. And I think for me, one of the great ones is just the cost, like the manual labor costs, right? Like, if you have 100,000 people, you are burning $100,000 a day to make this, and even if you're paying 50, whatever the price was back in the day too. Like, it could be $50,000 a day to work this. It's just, who's paying for that? It's crazy to think about. But then you say that they all lost money on this, and again, like,
Lost money.
Unless you're kind of the major film studios now, where they just want to push their narrative so much that they'll
Right,
take
but I will.
loss.
Like I was saying, but I'll read this to you. I have to get my book. Sorry. Um, so all of these fairs, for those who are interested, all of these fairs had books written on them right after they were done. A famous historian of the day wrote like a 4,000 or 5,000 page book on the fair. That's how I got my information, and they're all available on the web. They're all a place called studylove.org, I think it is. He's got all the links to everything, and you can get all this information. So, for example, in Philadelphia, which lost $4 million, the writer of the history said, "It is not, however, on the basis of dollars and cents that the success of such an effort can be estimated. Therefore, money was not important to the people who were putting the money into this. So what was? What was important to the people putting the money in?" And I think that's when you start looking away partially from the buildings, which are kind of in the comedy world, we would call them the comedian with shiny stuff, trinkets and toys that you don't need as good an act when you've got shiny stuff, right? When you look a little bit away from that, at the beyond, I mean, all these buildings have massive displays, and the stuff being displayed is something else. But once you go to the Midway, now you start getting to two really bizarre things. One is the human zoos. So a large part of this Midway section is the showing off of primitive peoples um, that are now in the process of being conquered. Because remember, this was in the United States, especially. This is a time that the Native Indians were being wiped out, and they like to bring a lot of Native Indian tribes to these fairs to show off their savage, primitive nature. The reason why we Victorians need to wipe them out and kill them and destroy them and put them on reservations. But they would bring people from the Philippines, from Africa, from anywhere, the Aboriginals, and it was a human zoo with the idea of presenting the advancement of civilization. Way back, I think it first started in Tennessee, in Nashville. The Smithsonian Institute had an exhibit, and they had skulls of the primitive peoples of the world, and which of course were all small. And then they had skulls of criminals, and they were small. And then there was this one giant skull of a Victorian person from England, and they would then allow you to come in and they would measure your skull, and then they would take your measurement and show you where you fit on the evolution line. Were you a full Victorian, or were you still in savage land? And this was part of the fairs. The fairs also had, in the United States, they usually had an exhibit called the Old Plantation, which was showing how wonderful it was to be a black slave on a plantation and how much fun it was. These were part of the World's Fairs. And then you add that to the fact that you've got these historical exhibits. Now, the historical exhibits are not like just what we would have today, like a little museum. They were full, complete immersion experiences. They were experiences with thousands of actors recreating history for the viewer. So if we take St. Louis, I have to go into my book for this. So we take the St. Louis Fair on the Pike. We have, sorry, I just have to find it in my book. Here's a couple of the exhibits that you could have gone to in St. Louis. Ancient Rome was a colossal exhibit with over 400 actors employed to give the visitor the illusion of going back to the life of gladiators. A large arena called the Hippodrome showcased chariot races, jousting, boxing, and gladiatorial classes where 200 persons, 40 animals, including tigers, lions, and leopards. The finale was a reproduction of Nero's Rome burning. That's one. The Tyrolean Alps was a 9-acre reproduction of the Alpine region in Bavaria, Germany. It had 21 village cottages, a cathedral, and giant mountains of staff. Visitors could ride a simulated tram car through the Alps where real cattle and goats would be in pasture. Jerusalem had 22 streets, 300 buildings, replicated most of the large buildings of Jerusalem. Over 1,000 people came to the United States to work and participate in the exhibit. You had things like the streets of Seville, where you could walk down the Plaza de Torres. You had the replica of Luxor Temple for Egypt. You had the Great Siberian train ride, where you could have the illusion of traveling the Siberian train across Russia. The Irish village had a replica of St. Lawrence's Gate. Paris replicated France during medieval times. There was Constantinople, a Chinese village, the streets of St. Louis. Could you see how, if you wanted to manufacture a historical narrative, what a way to do it? Not only are you presenting the narrative bigger than life in interactive experience, you've got actors. So it's not just I'm watching the gladiators of ancient Rome, I'm talking to them. I'm after the gladiatorial, I'm outside and they're telling me about their battle it's like literally, if you were trying to brainwash somebody, what a great way to do it, because now you've not just seen a documentary on TV, which can be brainwashing enough. Now mentally you'll think I was actually in ancient Rome. This was the Smithsonian Institute's not going to lie to me. So, this is history. And now if you're a school teacher, which all school teachers would have gone to these fairs, now you go and tell your class of the things you did at the World's Fair and what you learned. And well, you're in grade 4, you're not going to think your teacher's wrong. And the teacher got the information from the World's Fair, so it has to be right. All of a sudden, within a generation, you've percolated a historical narrative without the need of television, radio, newspapers, books. You've just done it through these interactive exhibits. And I think that was a huge part of what these fairs were doing, creating the historical story we've come to believe our whole life. And it was actually, I think, manufactured here. And I'm not sure any of it's true.
Right. But wouldn't a problem with that be the idea that because even the Dubai one, I was looking it up before I had you on here, and there are a lot of schools that go and visit those. But then wouldn't a problem be like when did they stop telling us about those World's Fairs? Because I didn't know any of, and you know, you went to school like you said earlier, and you didn't even know that these existed at the time that you were studying that time frame.
Right. I don't know. I mean, these things were at the time, I mean, they were huge. They were huge events. And I don't know how they sort of disappeared from the historical narrative. It's like they just vanished. Um, maybe because people were asking too many questions about it. Maybe there were still enough people who were alive. I mean, in the 1920s, you'd have had a lot of people who could have potentially remembered, what are you talking about? They built the World's Fair. That was there when I was a kid. I played in those when I was a kid, like before they had this thing. So maybe, and this is just an example, you have to just sort of remove it from discussion for a while until all the people who could have been alive at the time are kind of dead. And now but there was nothing at all about this stuff. There were a few books written for a while. And like I saw a couple in the 1970s or the 1980s, but nothing really serious. And then all of a sudden around 2016, there started to be videos being done about it. A few people on the internet started talking about this. They were calling these word Tartaria, this word mud flood, this thing that started to get thrown around, and the World Fair started to get thrown in, and all of a sudden there was like a zeitgeist, and now 100,000 people are going to YouTube to watch videos on these things. And it's like, if I had tried to write my book on the World's Fairs, the same book I just wrote here with very controversial material, if I wrote that in 1995, nobody would have bought it. 100 people might have thought, it's kind of interesting, I'll take a look at that, whatever. But it's like, it was a combination of hitting a zeitgeist that for some reason the information is available, the information is open I guess another part of the reason it's been buried for so long is all of this stuff would have just been in libraries. The photographs and the books and everything else were in libraries. So you would never see them unless for some reason it would be presented in TV and movies and whatever, weren't talking about them. So, okay. But once the internet sort of took the next level and libraries are putting all of their stuff on the internet, people could dig into the 5,000 photographs on these things and start asking, wait a minute, how come I've never heard about this? How come who built this? So I think it's also a combination of, once the things became available on the internet and became open search items, that was when probably the questions really started being asked, what the hell is this? But yeah, I can't believe the course I took was the United States after the Civil War, 1870 to 1900. The exact time frame of these fairs, not once did this come up in my university course. How is that possible?
Right. And when I was talking to people about having you on, I was showing some of these images to some people and they go, okay, well, where'd you find these? And I wanted to sort of, when I had this on the thing about Amazon.com, 1901 Buffalo World's Fair, I just went to Google and typed in Buffalo World's Fair. Like they're not, right. This isn't hidden. They're just not, they're not saying anything about it. And I think you're absolutely correct. I think that's why a lot of people are talking about things like Tartaria, like people are there's not as much hesitation to go into things like even like flat earth and the way that our history is being told, because of the fact that you can almost condensify efforts where people all over the world can do different research on the same thing and share ideas and opinions, where it would take you a full lifetime even to rent the books and read them about these things to then draw some conclusion. And then for you to then write that book and then put that evidence out there, it would take generations and generations. Now it's so quick. And this is, I believe, why they're going so full force into the current narrative. But we're also seeing them rewrite history in real time right now. So it would be much, much easier even back in the day to just say whatever they wanted to say about these things. And that would just be taken aboard because they owned all of the printing press and all these different things, right? Like,
yeah, you got the issue too. So once we take the fairs in context of their time frame, so now we've only talked about the fairs themselves. Well, you have to talk about the time frame we're dealing with, 1860-ish to 1900, 1910. We've got a time frame where history tells us every city in North America went through a giant fire. where literally every city in North America burned down. And so, and not just burned down. I mean, not just, I mean, literally it looks like Dresden. Look at this. This is Boston, I think, right? Actually, I think. Uh, this is not a fire. This is not fire. This is the equivalent of a World War II bombing rate. So the question is, what did this? And what did this in every city in North America? You know, oh, they're all wooden buildings, and but this is not wood. This is disintegrated and melted stone. This is what you're looking at. You're looking at melted stone. And you can see some of the photographs, you'll see like granite sliced in half. And I mean, this is also part of the narrative. So we've got these bizarre city fires. All of the cities that had World's Fairs had fires like this, still built the World's Fairs, still tore them all down anyway, right? Like San Francisco, they have the earthquake and then they just have the fair and tear the fair down, even though they supposedly need buildings to house homeless people. So you've got these World Fairs happening. You've got these strange orphan trains going on at this period of time where you've got 10, 50,000 orphans in these cities where are shipped on trains out west to move to new cities. Where are all these kids coming from? Where are their parents? What happened to them? You know, how do you have 50 or 100,000 orphans all of a sudden? You've got at the same time building these giant insane asylums all over the world. This is the period of these huge, I mean, you're talking 10,000 room insane asylums that all are bigger than the Medici palaces of Florence and are stunning. I mean, they're palaces. They're like Buckingham Palace. So one, why do you need so many insane asylums? Why do you need to make them look so beautiful and ornate? Where are all these insane people coming from all of a sudden? All of these things are pieced together. And that's when it's starting to tell me that we're probably dealing with whatever a reset is. This is part of it. I don't think the city fires are over a long 100-year period of time like they try to tell us. I think it's in a much shorter period. If they gave us the real years of the fires, we'd start figuring out something happened on a continent-wide, perhaps worldwide basis, and we would ask too many questions.
Yeah, the
and you always get pictures like this, right? These two people posing in the middle of it in these bizarre images of, you know, like it just, they make no sense. The ones for San Francisco are the worst because it's like literally they're watching the city burn down around them and they're all sitting down in lawn chairs and like having a picnic and like, what? It just reminds me of movie extras when I looked at it. But so this is another part of the World's Fair dilemma of the time is what's causing all these supposed fires? We'll just call them city destructions. And again, massive rapid building times. And I don't know. I mean, once you start looking into things like what's called the Carrington event of 1859 and whatever was happening and supposedly in 1812, 1815, where you're dealing with things like the Tecumseh Comet and earthquakes and volcanoes and the Mississippi River changing course and flowing north instead of south and just bizarre something happened, whether it's a worldwide war, whether it's alien attack, whether it's plasma bursts from the sun, but there was something worldwide that was a destructive force, whether it was pre-planned or part of some sort of cycle the point is, whatever the cycle is, we're in it now. That's why this stuff is important. We're in it now. The fact that they're using the word reset, et cetera, that's not an accident. It is not some sort of little financial thing they're going to change. It's referring to everything. Everything is going to get blown out completely. And these what you're looking at are images of the last one. And we still have no idea what that is. But if we can begin to understand it, understand how the fairs took us into this new world we've lived in, we can start hopefully understanding where we're going, so we stay one step ahead. But that doesn't mean we can stop it, because it might be part of something cyclical, something beyond somebody pushing a button, that it's literally hardwired into. I consider this a simulation. I don't consider this a tangible world. It's more like a computer simulation that we live in, and these things might be hardwired in it. Only a very few we'll call them people, know the time schedule, and they can be 20 years ahead of the reset happening, and they can maneuver things in such a way so the reset is good for them and not for everyone else. Either way, we have to know we're in it now. And that's why the fairs and the book is important to me anyway.
Right. And I think that it's interesting. What you just said too is one of the things that was an advantageous idea that, well, again, it's hard to even know if these are legitimate stories and stuff like that, because there were stories about some astronomers coming over from the, the English world, I guess, and coming over to the Americas and predicting eclipses and blowing the minds of some of these people thinking that they're gods or they're these, that, and the other thing, right? But then you kind of think like people who are more connected to the earth don't understand the stars and the cycles. Just seems kind of just bizarre. But again, if you understand these kind of things, you can play ahead from people who don't know these things. And the orphans are so weird. I was going to bring that up, but wasn't there some sort of displays and stuff like that of those things? And it just, the other thing I wanted to bring up too was the idea that nowadays we're getting to the it's not as out there with people understanding the Mandela effect and random event generators and stuff like that, right? Where there are certain things where people understand that your mind can play tricks on you, and like it's what comes first. Can we affect history and can we affect the past with consciousness with things like the Mandela effect? And this is why I also think your work is very important too, because it's bizarre, it doesn't make sense, and it makes you wonder what is actually going on and what's to come.
Yeah, so I guess I was so lucky because, well, okay, I have a history background and a research background, which of course important. More important was the years I spent studying with a Korean monk, with several native Indian medicine men on their reserves, with various qigong teachers from China, and so I was able to immerse myself in this other world of knowledge, in this other place of understanding, this place of sort of the ancient world still being presented, albeit quite hidden. We're not talking about those people running their organizations and their $500 weekend workshops. These are medicine men who live on a reserve, and their sweat lodges in their backyard, and they don't leave their house pretty much unless they have to go visit somebody or whatever. They are, as old school as you can be. And all of that was very helpful in my understanding of, because my first book on Power Then was all about ancient Egypt, ancient Mexico, the true knowledge that the ancient world had, that the archaeological story of our world is completely false, is completely wrong. These are not backward savages. These are people more advanced than we are, not only in technology, but science, but geometry, mathematics, everything was on another scale. But I still had a feeling that at least history-ish was true, sort of the last 1,000 years. But now, once I got into the fairs afterwards, I'm now doubting all of that as well. I'm really doubting. I'm doubting everything from the stories of Napoleon to the U.S. Civil War to, I mean, we're taking it right to the forefront of, there's so many questions just about the moon landings and the Kennedy assassination itself, right? So we've got film footage of the Kennedy assassination. We've actually got, albeit doctored and but we have at least footage of it and we have accounts of it. Can we really trust the stories of Napoleon's time if we have no video, we have nothing? And so the more I was just looking into history in general, like the story of the Battle of Waterloo, this one blows my mind, right? Like I can't remember what there's supposed to be, 50,000 dead on both sides. But when you go to the battlefield, there are no bodies. There are no graves, there are no bodies. They can't find any, zero on the battlefield. And so again, the more you dig into it, doesn't matter what history you dig into, there's a problem when you try to match up real, actual, tangible facts with the story. And so again, my feeling is now we've been living in a manufactured historical dream, and history is important, right? History in 1984, George Orwell was very clear that the way you control the present is you have to control history, because history explains why everything is the way it is. So if you want things a certain way, you have to have a historical narrative that tells you this is what government is, this is what money is, this is what cars are, this is where they come from, here's the bad things people did, here's the good things people did. Oh, so that's why things are the way they are now. Okay. And if you control the present, that's how you control the future. So actually controlling the future comes from controlling the past, controlling the narrative, controlling what people think is history. So it's really important. As you say, it's being changed even now. It's being constantly changed. It's being constantly maneuvered. The internet is being more and more tightened up, more and more. It's not even that it's controlled. It's just how old are you, Rob? You're
Turning 30 at the end of the month.
Yeah. So you were old enough to be using the internet, like I was in like 2002, 2003. We were on it. We were, 2004. We were searching a bit on the internet. The internet was totally open. You could put something in your search engine and you could get 5,000 results, 10,000 results, and you would get results of all sorts of various things. Now your search results, it's incredible. You pump in, it doesn't matter what you pump in, your search results will actually wind up being about 150, 200 search results, and it stops. It tells you on page 1, you have 1.2 billion search results, but when you try to go to the end of the page, end of the whole thing to see the whole 1 billion, you only get to page like 18. It's 100, you get 170, all of a sudden now it says 178 search results, and it's usually government-like sites. I remember when I used to look up alternative healing things. Like say I got a sore neck. Okay, I could look up acupuncture for sore neck, or, herbal remedy sore neck, for example. And I would get scores of sites, really interesting places. Those things don't exist in a Google search anymore. Now, I don't think it's that they don't not exist, because if I can remember certain website names, they're still there. I can click them in. But if I can't remember the name, even with a really good detailed set of search words into the search box, I can't find it anymore. So it's almost like so much stuff has just been pushed to the outside, and that's a way of controlling history. You just, or anything, you keep what's available, because nobody goes through past page 2 on their Google search page. So once you've gone past page 2, that's rare. You just put the search results you want there, and it's highly unlikely anyone's going to go digging further than that, even if the stuff was available, and it's not. And then we have the Mandela effect, which is the strangest thing I've come across, because it's a definite changing of things in our world, but that they're not random. That's the thing that got me about the Mandela effect. It's not random. Like, if it was random, all of a sudden one day we'd wake up and the New York Yankees didn't win the 1961 World Series, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden the Cincinnati Reds won the 61 World Series. Something that is things that are so ingrained in people's minds, for sure, particularly anyone who, like for example, who's a sports geek, who numbers are key to their minds. Rocket Richard will always have 50 goals in 50 games in 1945. That's because if all of a sudden the main NHL site just said he scored 46, it'd be what? Oh, stop. No. And if the NHL said, no, it's always been 46. But what's being changed are little tiny things in songs, little tiny things in movies, little tiny things in a book here. Enough that it's like, you could be convinced, like, you just didn't remember it right. You just didn't, but when you look at the change makes no sense. That's the other part of the change, the change version of the Mandela effect usually makes no sense. Like the most perfect one is the scene of Jaws, the scene of the teeth from what's that James Bond movie that we're talking about? The one anyway, with the girl with the teeth.
Yeah, I can't remember at the moment now too, but yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the movie. Was it Moonraker? Maybe it was Moonraker.
Might have been before my time.
It makes no sense when she smiles without the braces. It makes sense with the braces. Now, what I've found that's really weird, though, is if you look to that time frame, so 19, whatever that was, 79, 80, and you go to comedy sketches that were done with that, there will always be the braces involved in it. Or if you go hear James Earl Jones saying lines from Star Wars, it will always be on a talk show. It'll always be what you think it's supposed to be. It's only the movie that has been changed, not the branches that have come off it. The branches are all still there. So it's also interesting to see that whatever's being changed is being changed on a very chosen basis and doesn't, in a sense, at least now, have ripple effects. But in a sense, that it's mind-blowing that that can happen. And I don't doubt we'll see bigger and bigger and bigger things going on get changed. And it's all a part of this whole question of what is history? How do we know, just because it's in a book and just because there's somebody in university telling us what the story is, how long have I taken things at face value? How can we prove it? And unfortunately, it's really hard to prove almost anything.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. Again, it's just working backwards logically, right? And another reason why we're not taught about the trivium and the quadrivium and all those classical arts to prove things, substantially in the world. And just another one too. And I was going to show it, but I also kind of maybe want people to go and research these things themselves and ask these questions, because San Francisco is a weird one. There's also lots of pictures of Russia at the time where you're having pictures, and at that time you needed a super long exposure. They needed to be in one specific place for a long time to capture it. And at the time, there is no one in the cities, at the city center, like in massive parts of these cities, and there's no one there. And you just had like it just asking those questions are huge too, right? And I never really contemplated that idea of the Mandela effect only being specific things, and that's very interesting too, because it's why is it this and not that? Like those are very important questions as well.
Right. Yeah, what you're talking about is these photos, usually about the 1860s, 1870s, of cities all over the world, which are just empty. They're everything is in perfect condition, but they're empty of people. More importantly, they're empty of horses. They're empty of garbage. They're empty of horse poop on the street. They're empty of smoke coming out of chimneys. You could just say, oh, well, maybe they're going through their own lockdown and they're all inside, and that's what they're taking a photo of. Somebody's going to be having to cook their lunch. And in 1870, that meant you had to put fire in a stove, and that means there's going to be smoke coming out of your chimney. There's no smoke. Bizarrely, when you look at the ones of San Francisco, because that's another one, the 1870 panorama of San Francisco, which again is just this massive city, supposedly built in 30 years with nobody in it, and there's no hitching posts for horses. Now, you'd have 40,000 horses maybe in this city pulling carriages and whatever. You have to have some place, like every Wild West town, to tie your horse up to. There's none in the photograph. So these photos, again, the more photographs that are reappearing that we're getting access to don't answer questions. They just bring up more and more and more bizarre questions because they tend not to make sense. And with any kind of, and somebody could try to say, yes, oh yes, they managed to move, they got all the people out of the city, they got them all in their homes for the 2 hours for the photo, and they kept all the horses away. You kept every horse, every dog, every cat off the streets for the 2 hours that you were taking a photo in a city like St. Petersburg, which would have had 100,000 people. Come on, we're looking at an absolutely empty city. So what actually are we looking at? Are you looking at a city where everyone and everything was killed and you've just taken a photo afterwards? I mean, I have no idea what you're looking at, but it's not just the picture of a city in 1870 and moving on. It's something much, much stranger.
And I think you've answered some of these questions just in breaking some of these things down. But I mean, do you see, like, so what is it that you see going on in the world right now? And from your vantage point, with the research that you've done from the World's Fairs, and also what you're talking about with the elders that you've worked with, and all these different spiritual work, what do you see the future looking like? Is there a way that you see this going, or where we're moving into?
Yeah, it's not good. It's this is going to continue. This is going to get much, much worse one way or another. I consider this reality over, to be quite honest with you, from the standpoint of anyone who wants to be a human. This reality is over. And there's good news, but first you have to see the bad news. And the bad news is that if you keep trying to fix a reality that's not going to be able to be fixed, you're wasting your time and your energy. So many people are trying to change it, fix this, change the government, change the system, change this, and I think this experiment or whatever it is going to continue down the dark path it's on. Good news is, though, there is so much happening at such high speed that anybody who wants to look at it can have very deep understandings, realizations, and awakenings. So first step is the possibility for gaining a deeper level of knowledge right now is probably better than we've known for at least since the Second World War, maybe even before that. And some of the people I know who have had really deep realizations of reality will just say they've done in a year what people used to need 10 years to do. The speed of it has been incredible. The other part of the good news is just because I think this reality is going to be, I don't want to necessarily just say ended, but it's going to be a place you don't want to be a part of, doesn't mean that it won't be access to potentially a different reality. There are multiple realities going on at the same time. We've just learned how to, like a radio dial, lock into AM 1200 every day. You don't have to lock into AM 1200 every day. There is a reality at AM 1100, at AM 1000, at AM 800. And perhaps as things get more and more crazy, we are going to learn it's a natural ability. We all have this, right? The shamans have these abilities to alter these realities automatically and always have. They just shift there and don't stay and come back, work here, go over, come back. We might be seeing something like the question of the Maya, because that's a real curiosity. Is the Maya, the civilization in ancient Mexico, which built massive cities, spectacular geometrical and mathematical constructions, had unbelievable knowledge of everything, just disappeared. They just vanished. There's no bodies. There's no grave sites. And these are standard archaeologists. They have no idea, and they try to give explanations as to what happened to them, but they have no bodies. They can't even show that they're dead anywhere, and they can't say they left and like all got on boats and went to Africa or something. They just literally disappeared. And it's possible, my theory might be that they finally just said this place is getting too insane, whatever insane was in 700 or 800 AD, and they just said, we're leaving. We're not going to be part of this, and we're going somewhere where we want to be. And so I get the sense that that is the ticket, that as the Hopi talked about, where there will be a point where reality splits in two, where there will be the material road and there will be the spiritual road. And at a certain point of time, you'll have, in a sense, made your choice by the way you've been living, and you won't be able, it doesn't matter what one you want to be on, you will be on the one you're going to be on based on how you've lived and how you come to understand yourself and your place in the world. I would be, that's a high possibility too. This, in a sense, this one day just might, and half of everybody isn't there anymore. And you're on one now, you're on one side or the other, sort of, you might say, a completely new world. So I think that's where we're headed, and we are in the intermediate zone of whatever that change is going to be. And this reality is going to be, I will be surprised if the reality itself turns around. But again, don't then take that to mean there isn't a different reality, a separate reality, you might say, where when you learn how to make your consciousness shift and your entire physical form shift, you can go into that shamanic world and then just choose not to come back. I think that's a huge part of what might be going on here, that decision process is starting to be placed on people, that without knowing it, people are choosing. Do I want the world of the iPhone and the tracking and the system of what's coming, or do I want something that is different, that is a type of freedom? And I think you're seeing that question, but you're not going to see it here. It's not going to be like there's going to be one city like this here, and then there's going to be this community over here. No. The reality is going to be, this reality is going to be universal one way or another. It's going to, similar like the World's Fairs, it's all going to be the same. The question being is, have you done the work you need to do to be able to be at a point where you can make a choice? Because most people won't get the choice. They're not going to have that choice. They're going to be in the reality because they don't know anything else. They have no ability to shift themselves. But if you do the work, you'll maybe have the possibility to shift into something far different.
Wow. Yeah. I love all that. And I think because I usually ask a question in terms of what needs to change in the world so we don't go through this again. But I'm wondering if it's even possible that this current reality or this realm that we're in, if it's even possible to have anything different.
Right.
And then if that's the case, and what you're talking about is that choice and finding that, what is it that people can do or take from any advice you might have to find that, whatever it might be, the strength or the courage, the resiliency to go in and ask those questions of yourself, so when you're faced with this choice, that you're able to kind of do this.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges is dealing with what we might call the spiritual self-help program of the last 40 years, which has been a huge part of it. Of you create your reality, you control your reality, you are responsible for your reality. So if you just think hard enough, if you wish hard enough, you can make anything you want happen. And while there's some truth to it, I mean, we can alter certain things. A lot of things have never changed, and we have to start to see that that presentation is not really true. Reality is built a certain way for a certain purpose, and we that's a whole nother, almost like another show, what reality is and why it's the way it is. Once we stop trying to fix reality, stop changing reality, it's not that I say reality is good. This reality is wonderful. I mean, I know reality is insane. It has been insane ever since I've been alive and ever since I can look back in history. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because it's insane, I'm not privy to who or whatever constructed it, and maybe they want it to be insane. So if I'm trying to fix something that wants to be insane, I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting my energy. What I can do is make a choice on my own consciousness of what do I feel I most want to be and do for myself, which is I'd like to have sanity and I'd like to have freedom and I'd like to live as, even though I know I'm not this body and I know I'm not this thing talking to you, I know it's an illusionary feature. I'd still like the illusionary feature to be as human as it possibly can in the dream. So I think that's step one, is just making these decisions on what's really important to you personally. And it doesn't have to be the same for anybody else. These are just you. What feels right for you? What is most important for how you would like to experience existence? Then once you take that, then you can start building, like, okay, how can I deepen those things? How can I work with those things? Because then I'm not trying to fix this. And it's not that you're trying to fix this here. That's another big twist. When you start to see, it's not that you need to fix yourself so much, is that you need to see yourself clearly, both the nice parts and the good parts. Begin to see how energy and your form and your structure operates, and begin to root yourself in something that you feel is truthful. So seeing false, going through history, like we're doing right now, this is a religious journey. This is a real spiritual journey. People may think it's not, because this is not what's in, the Bhagavad Gita or something. Well, actually this is, because you are unraveling false. The way you find truth is not knowing what truth is and walking there. If you already knew truth, you wouldn't need to do anything. So you have to find false, and you look for false and you drop it. You turn away from it. You start with little false things and you grow bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, if you drop enough false, you'll come to the one thing that you can't drop. There'll be one thing eventually in time that you can't label false. You've just found truth. That's kind of how it works. It's a backwards journey into what's true. So the best recommendation I can have is remember that. Find like-minded people, because there's lots of them, not only where you live that you may not know, but certainly you can bump into them through various YouTube channels or chats or forums who at least you have the ability to communicate with, and you don't feel like an outsider. You don't feel like crazy. I know so many people now who've been, their family have turned their back on them because of certain beliefs that they have now. Literally, they can't talk to their parents, they can't talk to their sisters, they can't talk to their, anybody. They've been shunned. And this is really, really difficult. They feel unbelievably alone. And of course, they question, then maybe I should stop thinking like I do, believing what I believe, because I'm alone. I have no, but there's 10 million others just like you and feeling the same thing. And if you can find a way to connect with each other, you're not alone anymore. Now you found someone just like yourself, and now you can strengthen where it is you feel you want to go and dig into. And that allows your work and your inner process to go much, much deeper. So again, that's why I say, even though the times are insane and are going to get more insane, they really are. This is just, we're in warm-up stage. We haven't even hit. I saw some of this stuff in visions 25 years ago, 20 years ago. I have a pretty good idea of what's coming. We're still in the warm-up of it. But allow that to be your reminder of, can I take the external craziness and find a deeper truth out of it? Not because I want to fix it, not because I want to change it, but because I want to know what's true. I want to know what reality is. I want to know who I am. I want to know what happens when I die. I want, those kinds of questions, push them up to the surface. And this time period, like I say, gives you the greatest opportunity to get answers that humans have had for generations. And that has to be the thing we take from it, is it becomes a journey we share with others doing the same thing, but it's an individual journey we're going to have to take to say, I'm looking for the one thing that's true or the one thing that's sane, and I don't care what the external world throws at me. I want those answers, and you really might get them.
I love it. I that was a fantastic little answer. That the work that you've done in this regard as well. I've watched a bunch of your work on your YouTube and your books and everything like that. And I'd love to maybe get you back here to just talk specifically about your journey, especially in Falling for Truth, and some of the sort of training that you've had with monks and with the elders and the Native Americans and stuff like that. Because I think that's just as important as your answer there was. Understanding the past and understanding yourself is somewhat the same thing. And it's all about chipping away at what the falsehoods are to go towards the truth. Yeah. But I'd love to maybe cap this conversation as this World Fair and sort of tease maybe something in that regard in the future, hopefully. And maybe if you want to plug where people can find your work, how they can support you, how they can follow you, and sort of dive into these things more if they find that this is interesting to them.
Yeah, sure. If it's me you're looking for, yeah, you can go. I've still got a YouTube channel running, amazingly. Howdie Mickoski Talks is where that is. I've also got things being mirrored on BitChute and on freevoice.io. They tend to get put there as well. I have a website with a really strange name, Egyptian-wisdomrevealed.com. There's not much there, but at least you can track through. If you go to Amazon and search my name, because Rob will have it in the description box, my books will come up and you can see what they are. And if those books interest you, little donations that come through PayPal are always appreciated. But I don't have Patreon channels. I don't have anything that's a sort of a generating support. A lot of what I've tried to do is not demand people have to pay for information being shared. I'd rather have people share and donate back with me or buy books because something has helped them or been valuable to them. I'd rather have it as something that comes after rather than something that is before to open the door to get anything. That's kind of how the teachers I had taught me, and I tried to, even with this, follow that. So, but there's lots of other great people if you're looking into the fairs and the history stuff. Like I say, John Levy, Campbell at Autodidactic, Michelle Gibson, No Place Like Home. There's lots of really good channels out there as well on YouTube that you can go into diving into all this information. Mine can be maybe a touch point, and Plato's Cave on spiritual warfare so it's a lot of stuff. So you're welcome to check it out, and you can contact me through that.
Amazing. I'll have all that in the description. And I want to thank you very much for your time and just the work that you've done, because this is endlessly fascinating for me. It's truly helped me. And I'd love to potentially have you back on to talk about more of these spiritual concepts and ideas, because listening to some of the things that you've broken down just on your YouTube channel in those regards has really, really helped me in my life too. So I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, and I'll have everything in the description. I hope people enjoyed this, and we'll get you back on here soon. And yeah, I want to thank you very much for your time again.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see maybe in a month or two what we have to talk about. There could be a ton.
Yeah, things are moving pretty quickly here, so there could be quite a lot pretty soon. All right, thanks, Howdie.
Cheers, Rob.